to talk about my URL in IRL. In this context, when I say URL, this means my digital persona. So this is the self that I have constructed, activate, and cultivate online. Selves that I imagine we all in this room certainly have. One of which you can see on the screen here, which was a commission for Rhizome that studied the gestures of club culture. So when I say IRL, which I'm sure you know, or many people know already, it means in real life. I want to say at first, I have to disclose that I do have a real issue with this term IRL, even though it's often bandied about within discussions of internet and technoculture. The reason for this is because IRL in itself suggests that the things that we do online via a myriad of URLs aren't actually real, and that, as we know, isn't true. So within my research, writing, curatorial, creative, and academic practice, that you'll usually see me talking about AFK instead of IRL, which means away from keyboard. The reason for this is because, in my opinion, language really matters, and us changing our language when we talk about the internet and what we do there helps remind us of the impact of these URL or activated spaces and the resonance of our actions, ourselves, within and beyond them. But URL and AFK isn't as quippy as URL IRL, so here we are. And now I've spent the first 5 minutes here undermining the title of the talk, which is great. My name is Legacy Russell, and I'm a glitch feminist. I am also, as I mentioned previously, a writer, an artist, and a cultural producer. I'm not going to say the work I do is about, because I find that sort of essentialism to be stifling and restrictive. Instead, I'm going to say I'm into. So I'm into gender performance and the internet. I'm also into looking at the ritualized action behind our use of these new media materials and the idolatry this usage perpetuates, as in how it can elevate and make visible experiences, stories, ideas, and the people behind them in new and exciting ways. Also, I'm into what it can teach us about how to better love ourselves and love one another too, with this self-love and collective love as a radical and essential action and activism. So you're seeing here a YouTube performance that I presented recently at Decad in Berlin. If you play a little audio. You can hear this is Nina Simone, the legend, singing Feelings. So I'm also into making space. When I say make space, I'm talking about kind of throwing your elbows a little bit. Making space is a political action, figuring out ways to take up space as part of that activism, and pointing toward the internet as a material that allows for congregation and meeting of people like myself, and maybe even like some of you in this room today, in a world that consistently asserts the violence against female and femme-identifying people, queer people, people of color, across the spectrum of gender, often asserting that we should not have a voice and should not have control over our own bodies, and in some cases do not even have a right to live. So in celebration of some of the important work that QT POC artists are doing today, I'm sharing here E. Who's on the upper left here, and Manuel Arturo Abreu and Shanae McElwain Holloway. Each of these artists are using online platforms as urgent sites of performance, creating new discourse and directions that challenge the representation of historically othered bodies and sexualities. I was asked to speak today on the components of my practice, which can be hard to define as they can sometimes be quite blurry, but which I would say are broken up into 3 different components. Glitch feminism, no angel, my research and writing, and then my artwork. So we'll start with glitch feminism. What is glitch feminism? Glitch feminism is a creative and political exploration of how the material of the internet can expand or glitch the construct of the binary body. It deploys the language of glitch in positing that an error within a flawed machine that we operate within, one that disproportionately enacts violence on historically othered bodies, is not an error at all, but rather an integral systems correction to the mechanics of culture and society as we know it. So, glitch feminism for me, I began theorizing and writing and lecturing about it in 2013. The Glitch Feminism Manifesto was first published then in the online journal The Society Pages and was later expanded into an essay as commissioned for Rhizome. For glitch feminism, the digital arena becomes a regenerative site of creative exploration and artistic experimentation where new selves can first be born via online performance and then born beyond as the performing individual makes physical these online avatars, making social and cultural space for new faces, redressing the construct of the body as we know it. So I'm going to share with you now a video which is called First Kiss, Last Dance. It strings together found footage and also some excerpts from Twin Peaks, the conservative talk show that was hosted in the early 90s by a gentleman named Geraldo Rivera, which features Club Kids, Michael Alec, and RuPaul, and then Godard's 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her. This in particular reflects on the intersection of gender and the body.
After midnight.
Hi, I just want to know, do people dress like this during the day, or is it strictly just at night?
You're born naked and the rest is drag, you know?
Maman Juliette, à 15h37, voyez remuer les pages de cet objet que, dans le langage journalistique, on nomme une revue.
The guys in the 3-piece suits over there, I look terrible in a 3-piece suit, but it's drag. I mean, everything you wear, this body you have is a vessel.
Et voilà comment, environ 150 images plus loin, une autre jeune femme, sa semblable, sa sœur, est le même objet. Où est donc la vérité, de face ou de profil? Et d'abord un objet, qu'est-ce que c'est?
Well, what is your day like? My day, usually I go to sleep at 7 in the morning. My day starts in the evening, so I have time enough to get something to eat, go and take a shower, shave my whole body, and then I tend to go out and have a home cocktail, then put on my makeup, and then go back out again.
Peut-être qu'un objet est ce qui permet de relier, de passer d'un sujet à l'autre, donc de vivre en société, d'être ensemble. Mais alors, puisque la relation sociale est toujours ambiguë, puisque ma pensée divise autant qu'elle unit, puisque ma parole rapproche parce qu'elle exprime et isole par sa qualité, puisqu'un immense fossé sépare la certitude subjective que j'ai de moi-même et la vérité objective que je suis pour les autres, puisque je n'arrête pas de me trouver coupable alors que je me sens innocent, puisque chaque événement transforme ma vie quotidienne, puisque j'échoue sans cesse à communiquer, je veux dire à comprendre, à aimer, à me faire aimer, et que chaque échec me fait éprouver ma solitude, puisque...
Just wondering, for the people who don't make money promoting parties, if you got kicked out of your parents' house, what would you do?
Now, Michael, what would you do? Guess you gotta find someone who's gonna pay your way.
Michael,
There are lots of people out there with lots of money willing to pay a lot of these people's way.
Puisque je ne peux pas m'arracher à l'objectivité qui m'écrase, ni à la subjectivité qui m'exile, puisqu'il ne m'est pas permis ni de m'élever jusqu'à l'être, ni de tomber dans le néant. Il faut que j'écoute, il faut que je regarde autour de moi plus que jamais le monde, mon semblable, mon frère.
Now, I mentioned, and we have alluded to the drug ecstasy. I want to talk a whole lot about, you don't have to tell your personal story if you don't feel like it, but is it a fact that you gave the drug to your mother, Michael?
I don't remember. That wasn't me.
Oh, right.
It might have been. I forget a lot. I forget a lot.
Yeah.
Mais où commence quoi? Dieu créa les cieux et la terre, bien sûr, mais c'est un peu large et facile. On doit pouvoir dire mieux. Dire que les limites du langage sont celles du monde, que les limites de mon langage sont celles de mon monde, et qu'en parlant, je limite le monde, je le termine. Et que la mort, un jour logique et mystérieux, viendra abolir cette limite, et qu'il n'y aura ni question ni réponse. Tout sera flou.
So, for glitch feminism, IRL allows for philogocentrism and neutralizing heteronormativity. IRL assumes that feminist constructions of online identities put forward via performative expression and action are latent, closeted, and fantasy-oriented, rather than explicit, empowered, and illustrative of that which is very real and very capable of living on offline. Embracing AFK as a feminist concept and discussion of the digital is therefore necessary, and it is in itself a glitch. It simultaneously undermines the ongoing fetishization of real life and gives weight to the digital self within the realm of the real that far too often is disregarded as being key to the evolution of an individual. Gender is a replicating virus. It's a replicating virus within a social machine. And just as fire fights fire, so does the error of the glitch as it goes up against this virus, finding victory in new configurations, often advanced and engineered by artists at night on the internet as they stand on the front lines of a rapidly expanding digital frontier. These digital spaces, in and of themselves, were not made for progressive means, and as such, continue to violently reify and celebrate mainstream representations of the body. With this in mind, the glitch strategically deploys radical visibility and presence within these online architectures that are far from utopic, challenging them, undermining them, and recoding them. There is more work to be done here, and more to transform as we work against gender binary. Philosopher and countersexual Paul B. Preciado speaks to the process of virtual transformation, noting that the widening scope of sexuality means leaving the body and turning toward an immaterial, informative, if not actually a digital space. The glitch body is capacious, and contemporary artists, such as the three that you saw earlier, to name a few, are decolonizing the architecture of the body via ongoing experimentation and performativity online. The poet and activist Essex Hempel spoke in 1995 about cyberspace, saying, quote, "I stand at the threshold of cyberspace and I wonder, is it possible that I am unwelcome here too? Will I be allowed to construct a virtual reality that empowers me? Can invisible men see their own reflections?" I'll say that again. Can invisible men see their own reflections? So in an effort to hold an accurate and positive mirror up to society, I created a project called No Angel. No Angel is a curatorial platform that I launched in 2016. It prioritizes presentations of exhibitions and public programs for and by artists and cultural producers of color, keeping the internet as material at the forefront. The platform identifies within the art world and art market a disparity in equal race and gender representation and aims to activate a productive site of urgent dialogue, alchemizing collaboration across minds, materials, media, and methodology. The name comes from an August 2014 article in the New York Times, wherein a New York Times writer referred to Michael Brown, who was an 18-year-old black teenager who was shot dead by a 28-year-old police officer named Darren Wilson within that same year in Ferguson, Missouri, prompting Black Lives Matter protests across the United States as no angel. So the article said that Michael Brown was no angel. The language of no angel, those chosen words, speak volumes. They speak to an ongoing and very problematic history of justifying violence against people of color and other marginalized people by undermining our humanity. In a world today where we are on the daily being faced with very real threats on our bodies, politics, and livelihoods. A when they go low, we go high vibe, to quote Michelle Obama, can on the one hand be a good mantra to essentially remain calm and carry on, but alternately, under a separate reading, can also be a strange manifesto of respectability politics. This notion that marginalized groups ought to police their own members and show their social values as being continuous and compatible with mainstream values, rather than challenging the mainstream for what they see as its failure to accept difference. This concept of constantly having to go high and how that is unequally doled out in societal expectations on white bodies versus black bodies, for example, or on men versus women within the workplace, as we've seen with the recent Me Too outcry online, is one that can in itself be a violence. We're constantly being asked to be better than better, and that superhuman self is one that is inherently problematic, as it doesn't provide room for change or hiccups in our constructed selves, for dissent within the performance of those identities, be it online or offline. No Angel, for those who are fans of Bey, was also the title of a Beyonce single released in 2013. The logo is therefore co-opted from that single. The duality presented in these representations of blackness, Michael Brown, who somehow deserved to die because he was imperfect as No Angel, and Beyonce, who has become somewhat of a greater than God idol within popular culture, speaks to this idea of visibility and also the tensions that lie within representation and the media. Projects under the No Angel umbrella grapple with visibility, investigating what it means to make necessary specific types of visibility with agency and, on the other hand, to sometimes choose not to be visible as a strategy in and of itself, both online and off. It began in part with an exhibition titled Wandering Wilding, which explored the idea of blackness as represented by, through, and in resistance within internet as material. This exhibition, which took place at IMT Gallery in collaboration as well with ICA London, featured artists Devin Kenny, Fanny Sosa, Niv Acosta, Evan Ifakoya, Tabitha Razar, E. Jane, and Hannah Black. It also had public programs, which allowed us to talk and workshop this idea of blackness as it intersects with internet and the material of the digital as it ties to representation and creating new images that allow for new discourse about visibility. No Angel has also done some other projects more recently. This is a flyer from a Glitch Shorts Night, which was a series of screenings of queer artists, artists of color, people who are producing work in this similar vein, as well as a club night, which featured a really wide gamut of artists, DJs, and makers who collaborated to produce an evening where we were taking kind of the online experience and materiality of what the digital is and trying to bring it into physical space. And this happened at ICA London. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about my research and writing. My research and writing actually drives everything that I do, and so it's what I'm going to kind of speak about in some detail as best as I can, even though there's quite a lot to cover. I've picked out a few examples. I'm really into writing about the internet and researching the internet, and so this is a wandering theme which I do throughout most of my research and writing. Currently, what's taking up the majority of my time is my writing and editing of Glitch Feminism, which is my book that's going to be forthcoming from Verso, but a selection of other projects and ongoing research items are as follows. So this is actually in the most recent issue of Screenshot Magazine, which is a magazine that deals with digital technologies within popular culture. This is an essay and photo essay accompanied by text and images. The text I wrote, the images were taken by British photographer Andreas Laszlo Conrath. This in particular, I love the discussion of organ projection in Yuki's talk previously because, of course, as you can see, here there's a direct line of prosthetics of technology, hand plus phone as it evolves equals the invention of the selfie stick. So, we're looking here at this notion of the sext, but also as well of the phone as kind of a sexual prosthetic, and how it can operate as a means of not only engaging and deepening intimacy, but also experimenting with technologies and the erotic. So this is just a quick snap of some of my poetic work. I think obviously exploration of language and poetics is something that, goes to the root of work that I've done. And, I write often about, within a poetic context and kind of experimental language and format, the internet and the body. This is an essay that was on the process of mourning and loss for Archipelago Journal, which was designed by Rowan Powell. Again, it kind of looks at the intersection of the body, but also, thinking about what happens when the body dies, and, what that means when it's represented online and how it impacts our physical selves within the loop of online and AFK. This was a continuation of Wandering Wilding, which was the exhibition that I spoke of previously. This is an online component of the exhibition, which was presented by Data Editions. This looked at the idea of movement as political movement, especially relevant within a climate of today where, of course, restricting movement seems to be increasingly a priority of more conservative government, and looking at how, to use movement as a radical action, but also how to explore choreography and how artists are exploring choreography using digital material as a priority to resist or to kind of push back against larger conservative structures, or as well the architecture of the internet, which in itself is not utopic, but absolutely does provide a space to express and to kind of expand in range. So I'll conclude here by sharing some images from a new body of work, which is a glitch of another kind. This is, or what follows is a series of works titled Black Ball Dasari, Emoji Portraits. So this series is super special to me. It's a collaboration between myself and my late father, Ernest Russell. My father was a photographer who worked with a handheld camera and film for a majority of his life, and then he lost his sight, and so, he decided that he would actually become a net artist at the age of, 55. And so he did this kind of quietly making internet art under the name Digital Man, and used a process of layering and digital manipulation as a means of toying with the process of image making. So the work that came out of his practice was one that, largely focused on the digital in the later part of his life, but he, of course, had quite an archive of amazing images that he had taken growing up in New York, as well as, being a native of Harlem and spending time documenting people, within his day-to-day, within his romantic relationships and beyond. So, in this collaboration, this work brings together the language of my own work, experimenting with the emoji as portrait as a means of toying with digital affect and how we use iconography as a means of self-expression, intersecting with the range of blackness as well as gender within these portraits and pictures that my father took over the course of his career. So this is a series that will continue to expand, but is a good note to end on, a reminder of the faces that we wear and perform as we try to break free of a binary existence. It's incredibly important to continue pushing digital material to its limits as we claim our range, complex identities that reject singularity and contain multitudes, realizing ourselves in our reach through and beyond the screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Legacy. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone? Okay, I do have a couple of questions for you. Wait. Okay, so you mentioned that research and writing is there are two important or key parts in your work, and I was wondering how does research and writing, especially research, connect and intersect with the process of making within your practice? Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the things that I meditate on, like in the production of my work, often is about like reading images. So, you know, my background is in first and foremost in art history. So, you know, kind of working within an academic practice and thinking about how I read images, you know, my ability to kind of use language as a point of access to talk about new media and visual culture is really important to me. So typically when I'm producing work, I'm often, you know, writing about it first. And in that, it allows me to kind of connect ideas and build connective tissue through different images and as well concepts that I'm curious and interested and excited about. And then building from there, of course, you know, using images themselves as a means of producing work. You know, I think as well in the writing of the book that I'm working on, it's been a kind of an interesting process to like flip the script on that a little bit, to be writing first and foremost about other people's work and to be thinking about how to read those images in relationship to work that I've already produced, which is this Glitch Feminist Manifesto. So creating links between those things has been kind of an exercise in itself. It's always kind of an interesting thing when you have a theoretical framework and then you look to kind of build or string through that framework aspects of one's own practice as well as the practice of others. So yeah, I think that, you know, I usually begin with my research and my writing first initially as a means of kind of getting those gears turning.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I don't know much about all these, right? But I read a lot. And I'm always amazed at the dichotomy that gets created.
Say it again?
The dichotomy. That,
Okay, yeah.
There's color, gender, all those things, and it's very binary at the end. And then from that created a language that is different from the one we use every day, or that is usually the thing we use to trade ideas. And little by little, it seems that at some point there's such a technocratic superstructure that reminds me of the 60s and the Derrida and the structure of these things, which eventually we have time to see what it became, right? Politically and all that stuff. And I'm wondering, I mean, in the end, how is this work and this body of thinking bringing people closer together instead of putting them apart?
I mean, I think that sort of intersectional politics is incredibly urgent and important. I also think that within sometimes how the word intersectional is used within a popular context, it can sometimes veer too severely towards celebrating like every individual as being an individual and therefore separate from each other. So, you know, I think that to look at intersections and to see individuals is really useful, but I also think that it don't necessarily feel that it's something that separates us. It's something that, you know, looks at the connectivity and the continuity between individuals, as well as, you know, thinking about that, you know, as we build online communities, as we kind of use digital networks, that those are opportunities actually to grow closer together and to not always, you know, sort of divide within our beliefs and as well within our understanding of one another. I specifically, as an art historian, often talk about artists as a means of pointing towards examples where within a creative realm, there's a lot of work to be done and being done to kind of push boundaries between those different dichotomies, as you mentioned. So, you know, I think performativity as it exists online is something that you can see everywhere, and, you know, obviously within that there are lots of individual niches, but I do think that artists do play a really important role in experimenting and kind of pushing boundaries in a way that actually sets a really important standard and precedent for the rest of culture. So that in itself brings people closer together.
Any other question? Okay, I have one more. So given the current socio-political landscape, what do you think the future of movements like glitch feminism will be?
That's a huge question. And so there's a lot to actually say on that, but I think that, like, movement in itself obviously is increasingly restricted. The ability to move has always been a real privilege and a liberty, and it's also something that, within the advancement of conservative politics across the world, that the first thing that goes is like the movement of queer people, the movement of poor people, the movement of people of color, the movement of women. So within that, I think that there's, a real problem, because of course within those restrictions, actually, there's a lot of deeply ingrained bias and racism, xenophobia that operates as a means of kind of controlling social strategy and economy as well. It kind of acts as an agent of capitalism. So, in the case of thinking about what glitch feminism can do within that, I definitely feel like that, it is largely a site of discourse. It's been a really, amazing journey of kind of seeing how it has manifested itself around the world internationally, and as well as how other people have adopted it and integrated it into their own theoretical thinking. So, the movement of ideas as it, has always been, but as, is more pervasive now in history than I think it's ever been before, I feel like is kind of the final, I don't want to say hope, but kind of a final frontier, if you will, because, those ideas as they continue to move and fighting for those ideas to move outside of the lines of restriction is incredibly meaningful if bodies actually can't do that movement. And this is why I think that, it's useful to talk about digital space, not necessarily as being utopic, but, not to kind of use the discussion of the digital as a means of seeing technology in a pejorative light, as in that it isolates everybody, that actually everybody is, kind of an exclusive individual who is incredibly selfish and they're out for their own opinions and their own voice. I think that as a position is one that, can be discussed and there is validity within it, but on the other side, I do feel like that, for people who are not able to move, digital material still has, an incredibly important role. And so, for there to be the opinion that, we should kind of exit it, the internet as a space or as a site, or perhaps, give a bit of a side eye to the digital because for whatever reason it fails. I think it does speak only to a very specific application, whereas the other side of that picture is that there are very much so communities that need this space as a means to collectivize, and that's something that I'm hoping as one kind of builds towards a futurity, hopefully one not with an end point, we can continue to look towards and expand upon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think we need to go for lunch now, and if you can come back by, let me just check.